Sex or the saw? Sex is, well, nobody knows. But the saw is family.
Hello, my name is John, and today I'm trying out something new. And so if you like it and you want to see more of these types of videos, go ahead and smash that thumbs up button and smash that subscribe button if you want to see more of my movie thoughts. And so I guess let's get started and say welcome. Today we've got two movies ready to battle at the Alamo, and introducing first, hailing from 1974, that is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by horror legend Tobe Hooper, the same guy that brought us the haunted house classic Poltergeist, as well as the single most underrated film of all time, in my humble opinion, and that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. If you want to see why I love that movie so much, check out the review I posted last weekend. And now, introducing its challenger, a movie that started a decade-long craze within the horror film industry, hailing from 2003. That is, of course, the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Marcus Nispel, the same guy that directed the Friday the 13th remake, the Conan the Barbarian remake, and we cannot forget that he directed a Spice Girls music video. And so how this video is going to work, there are 5 categories: acting / characters, visuals, story / writing, sound, and then an overall category that exists simply because some of the other categories are going to be coin flips. Some of the other categories are going to be landslides. And so that kind of takes into account that factor and just kind of has an overall, I don't know what I'm doing with my hands, but has an overall type of opinion. And obviously, a lot of these are based off of my personal opinion. So feel free to comment your thoughts and share them. And so basically, whoever wins 3 out of the 5 categories is the winner. And so I guess now it's time for these two movies to face off. Starting with the acting category, acting / characters. This category is going to be split up into 3 subcategories. First, we've got the final girl, and then we've got the Sawyers / Hewitts, and then we have the other side characters. And so starting with the final girl, the original has Marilyn Burns in an iconic performance, but the writing I don't think is up there with the Sidney Prescotts or the Laurie Strodes of the world. But that being said, I think the performance she's the best performance in the movie, and I think she's pretty iconic for that, right? Whether it's the movie she's in or the performance, she is iconic. And then the remake, you have Jessica Biel as Erin. I think the performance is fine, but even though I am a fan of the remake, she is easily my least favorite part of the remake, because the way she's written, she constantly makes all of the decisions, and all the decisions she makes are the wrong decisions that put her and her friends into harm's way. Whereas in the original, it's each character goes off and tries to find the other characters. So they each make that decision basically on their own for the most part. Where in the remake, it's Erin making the decisions for everybody else. And her decisions put everybody else in harm's way, and they're not even necessarily, and they're not smart decisions. They're like the horror trope type of decisions that you see in a lot of slashers. And so that does hold her character back quite a bit. And so I do think in terms of final girls, the original is far and away has a better final girl. And I guess moving on to the Sawyers and the Hewitts, depending, in the original, they're the Sawyers. And so you have obviously Leatherface, you have the iconic Drayton and the Hitchhiker. But those are the only 3 you get. Whereas in the remake, you get a much more extended family to it. You don't just get three men. And even though I'm a big fan of Drayton, and I'm a fan of Gunnar Hansen's portrayal of Leatherface, I'm also a fan of Andrew Brynjarskis. I don't know if I pronounced that right. I'm a fan of his performance as well, even though I do prefer the beginnings Leatherface, which is also him, but the remake also has Arlie Ermey's Sheriff Hoyt, which is an iconic character within this franchise as well. And I do think that having that extended aspect to the remake, it's kind of one of those coin flip categories, subcategory here. But I do think I'd give the edge to the remake in terms of the cannibalistic family, simply because it does have a more extended aspect to it, which helps add to the sense of dread, because there's less people around, because you can't really trust the people that aren't within your friend group, if you will. So let's move on to the side characters. This is a part where the original, this is my least favorite part of the original, is the side characters are, especially Franklin, the guy in the wheelchair. The acting isn't the best with these side characters in the original, and they're not written with any depth, so basically that's the worst part of the original in my opinion. And then with the side characters in the remake, I actually enjoy them quite a bit, especially Morgan, because he feels like a dick and a jerk early on in the movie, but you quickly find out that he's probably the smartest one in that group, and yet he can't, because he's the one that disagrees with Aaron's decisions, and Aaron's decisions are the ones that get them all killed. And so I do enjoy his character quite a bit. And so I do think, in terms of the side characters, the remake is far and away better than the original. And so if you keep in count, that's 2 out of the 3 subcategories going towards the remake. So who knows, maybe there'll be an upset here, but in terms of the acting category, I have to give the edge to the remake. Point. Remake. Now we're talking about the visuals. The original movie has a lot of iconic shots and iconic visuals, but I do think the remake has a better overall production design when you get into the inside of the family, the Hewitt's house compared to the Sawyer's house. That being said, I think the original has this very indie film quality to the way it's shot and the way it feels, almost like a snuff film-like feeling that makes it feel more real. And so when you have horrific events like this and you make it feel like it's more real, then it just adds to the horrificness of it because it feels more real. Whereas in the remake, it feels like a studio-produced movie. It feels like a movie, which takes away some of that realistic aspect to it, in my opinion. And so I do think, and so basically because even though I do think the production design is really good, I do think the visuals overall are really good. You know, I like the way it utilizes kind of the shots through the holes and throughout the film. But I do think because of the iconic visuals that the original has and the way that the surreal way that it's shot and it feels like almost like a snuff film adds a little bit to the horror feel of it. And so I think because of that, I think the edge, even though I don't think it's quite as a runaway or a landslide, I do think it does clearly, in my opinion, get the edge in the visuals category. Point. Original. Now let's move on to the story/writing category. The original has a pretty simple story, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just a simple story about a group of college-age 20s kids that get lost in the back roads of Texas, find this cannibalistic family, and all hell breaks loose. So when you have a simple story, it makes it easier to have less mistakes in the writing. So I do think overall it's a pretty tightly written story. There's some iffy dialogue here and there, but it's pretty good overall. And so I think moving on to the remake, this is one, it takes a little less simple route to it, as they kind of have to go to this farmhouse and meet up with the sheriff before they end up at the Hewitt's house. And even with that, the way, like I mentioned before, with the way the Erin is written, the final girl, and then even with like the last act, that final chase, there's a lot of horror tropes in there that they might appear in other movies that I love, but for whatever reason they stick out like a sore thumb in this particular movie. So I do think in terms of the story and writing, in my opinion, I think the original does kind of have kind of a landslide win, because I do think part of my issues is the fact that the final girl is written to be the one that makes all of the bad decisions. And then there's some horror tropes that stick out like a sore thumb. For instance, like in the original, she just basically keeps running until she finds someone on the road to pick her up and help her. Whereas in the remake, she's constantly stopping instead of continuing to run. She's constantly just stopping and just letting Leatherface catch up to her. And, you know, it happens in a lot of movies, but it sticks out so much in this 2003 remake. And so I think clearly the original has the edge in the story and the writing. Point. Original. Now moving on to the sound. I think the original, it obviously has that iconic picture snapping sound. And I like this kind of motor sound motif that they have throughout it. Like when you're first introduced to the Sawyer house, you find like these generators and stuff in the front yard, and you get kind of this motor sound that is obviously paid off in the final act with the chainsaw motor that you get in the background. But I think overall, this, in terms of sound, if you think about it, the score, at least in my opinion, it's not very memorable. Like I don't even remember what it sounds like. And so there's not really a big takeaway with that. And then with the remake, I like how they kind of utilized some of the surroundings and stuff with their sound in terms of the rain and the thunder, because when you get that raindrop type of sound and you get the thunder sound in the background, it helps add to a sense of dread within the film, and you kind of want that with a horror movie. And and it's another one where I don't think the score itself is quite, I don't think any of these two films have the best necessarily sound within this franchise, but this is one where it's literally a coin flip for me. But I do think I'm tempted to just give it to the remake. And I think I am just going to give the edge to the remake. If not for anything else, than to make it interesting, to give them a 2-2 tie leading into the final category. Point. Remake. And so now we are at the last category, and we are tied at 2-2. Moving into this, so the winner of this category will win the match, will win the face-off. And so we're gonna basically look at all of the categories and even the subcategories of the acting and characters. And basically we're gonna kind of look at them and kind of place them, whether they fall in the middle, whether they're clearly on one movie, one side or the other. And so kind of looking at the final girl, that's clearly on the original side, as I mentioned. And then with the Sawyer family, I do think it falls down the middle, honestly. But then the side characters, I think that's clearly on the side of the remake. And so I guess the visuals, I don't think it's clearly necessarily landslide-ish on the original's side, but I do think it leans a little bit towards the original. And then with the story, that one I think, in my opinion, is clearly on the original side. So right now we have 2 on the original side plus 1 leaning towards the original's direction. So I think you can tell where this is going to go, especially since I mentioned in the sound category, it's honestly a flip of the coin. So that's obviously down the middle. And even if you want to say the Sawyer ones, by the way I described it, falls a little more towards the remake, it still doesn't add up to the same of, still doesn't add up mathematically to the original. And so I think by that calculation, that gives the overall category to the original, making today's winner of today's face-off, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre face-off. The winner is, of course, the favorite, and that is 1974's original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, directed by Tobe Hooper. And I hope you enjoyed today's face-off. Thanks for watching my video. Maybe comment your thoughts on both of these movies down below. Today I just wanted to try something new. And if you liked the video, if you like this idea, then smash that thumbs up button. Comment, maybe even comment face-off ideas you have that maybe I could do in the future. And smash that subscribe button if you love action movies, comic book movies, horror movies. And I do plan to have a Texas Chainsaw ranking coming soon. It is my favorite horror franchise. And so stay tuned for that if you're a fan of this franchise. And then, as always, never forget that the Saw is family.